The worldwide coronavirus pandemic has threatened the lives of millions of Americans. At this point, thousands of Americans have already lost their lives, and we have a very vulnerable healthcare system where 27 million Americans do not have access to healthcare. More than 3 million people have filed for unemployment. They've been laid off. They've lost their jobs. And so there's a big question about what we need to do about fixing our healthcare system. And the ladies of The View thought it would be a good idea to have Bernie Sanders on, which I agree with. Great guest. Here is how they decided to bring that segment in. Take a look.
How does presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders answer accusations that he's politicizing the pandemic to push his Medicare for All agenda and that staying in the race could guarantee Trump another term? He's live on The View. Next.
Next. someone pays her to sound like that. Next.
No, I think it's permanent. It's just baked in now.
What was that? What was that?
Disdain. Like it was a jar overflowing with disdain is what it was.
Every argument against single payer has been completely and utterly demolished by what this country is going through right now. The nonsense propaganda about how people love their employer provided insurance. Oh, really? Do all those laid off people right now enjoy the fact that they're not insured? Do they enjoy that they probably got a letter in the mail telling them that they can pay an exorbitant amount for Cobra? This is absurd. This is the most absurd way of teasing the audience about an upcoming interview on the show.
I think that everyone in the audience should recognize what's going on right now. Anna Kasparian is politicizing coronavirus to push your Medicare for All agenda. I mean,
so they're saying you're not allowed to talk about fixing a broken system, which we are currently suffering the consequences of right now. Right now. You're not allowed to discuss any solutions for it because that would be politicizing it.
I mean, if you wanted to talk about the link between these two things, which, first of all, Bernie definitely wants to talk about that link, and it's perfectly reasonable. If you're going to bring him on, you're going to talk to him about coronavirus, and he believes that the policies he's been advocating for would have put us in a far better position to deal with it, would have saved lives. How about just say Bernie Sanders believes that single-payer healthcare would have helped America weather the pandemic? We'll discuss next on The View. Like, that would be a perfectly reasonable thing. But to pitch it as, how does he respond to accusations? And is he just trying to get Trump elected? To do it on both of those things implies that the only reason they're bringing him on is to try to take him down. It apparently was the only reason that they were bringing him on. And it does a disservice to the many people, even in their audience, who are probably growing increasingly interested in Medicare for All as they see what our current healthcare system is doing in a time of emergency.
So I think it's important to juxtapose what you guys just saw with the way the very fine producers over at The View treat other individuals. Okay, so let's take a look at the next video.
Future shock.
I want every American to be prepared for the hard days that lie ahead.
The president gives his most candid take on the possible death toll from the coronavirus.
They're very sobering. You know, when you see 100,000 people, that's at a minimum number.
Is hearing the worst case scenario the wake-up call America needs right now? Plus, presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders is live on The View. Why he's not dropping out of the race and says the pandemic proves American healthcare is broken and he's the man to fix it.
So it's interesting. That last part with Bernie was fine. And actually the way that they handled the Trump portion of that was fine as well, because they're not sharing like this overwhelming bias. They're not giving Trump a ton of credit. They're not, sharing any type of commentary in it. They're just explaining, hey, this is something that happened and we're going to discuss it when we come back from the break. That's the way to do it. I'm not saying that you need to say something incredibly favorable about Bernie Sanders, but accusing him of politicizing healthcare at a time when Americans are literally dying because of this pandemic is ridiculous. And then adding that extra layer of, is he just trying to get Trump reelected?
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I mean, I think that our audience is savvy enough that they probably, like me, just cringe at politicizing being applied to something that is obviously political. And it's the main piece of news, political or otherwise, in America around the globe right now. Who is talking about it? Who is planning for the future of it that is not politicizing it? What does that even mean? Like, he's saying we need to institute Medicare for all. That'll help us get out of this. It'll help us in the next pandemic. If they had Joe Biden on, he'd say, no, we should just continue with the system that we have right now. 10 million people still won't be insured, even if I get elected after a few years. How is that not politicizing it to say that we should maintain the status quo rather than changing? They're all doing the same thing. They're all advocating for what they think the system should be. But Bernie Sanders is the one that's having the label of politicizing being applied to him.
So maybe some would argue, hey, that was a tease, obviously written by producers. The hosts have nothing to do with that, so let's not be too tough on the hosts. Well, the interview didn't really convince me otherwise, because the framing of the questions were telling, to say the least. You guys should all watch the full segment to get a sense of how all of the hosts handled this interview. I think Whoopi Goldberg's ridiculous pressure on Bernie to drop out is something that I wish we had enough time to talk about. But since we're on the topic of healthcare, let's go to the framing that we heard from Sunny Hostin, who has made no secret about the fact that she does not like Bernie Sanders. So just understand where this framing is coming from.
Senator, some are accusing you of using the pandemic to push Medicare for all. And they're saying, at this time, we should put politics aside and come together behind the president. What is your response to politicizing this allegation that everyone is politicizing?
Well, I don't know who is making the allegation. I have political opponents who make all kinds of accusations. But should we put politics aside and all come together? Of course we should. And when we all come together, it seems to me we have to do several things. One of them is guarantee health care to all people right now. The absurdity that you may be diagnosed with the coronavirus and you go into the hospital and you spend thousands of dollars getting treated and maybe, God willing, you come out alive, well, you got a huge bill out there. If you're being diagnosed with cancer right now, the truth is that we have 500,000 people a year who go bankrupt because of medically related bills. So let us come together. You're absolutely right. But in coming together, we got to do a couple of things. And one thing is say that especially in this crisis, people should not have to worry about the cost of health care.
I think he answered that perfectly fine. But that was the whole, tease right before they went to the segment about how he's just politicizing an issue that he's tied to. But it's such a relevant issue that would actually save people's lives. Imagine all those people who did get laid off, right? So you're worried about your livelihood, clearly, but there's that added layer of being worried about getting sick and not having the ability to pay for the treatment you need to combat coronavirus. Because while testing is free based on what Congress has done, treatment is not free. So if you don't have insurance, like the 17-year-old in Lancaster County, California, who was turned away when he went to urgent care, you are likely to die, right? That's what happened to that 17-year-old. He was turned away, he went into cardiac arrest, and he died.
Yeah, and so you're right to point out that even Trump has tried to conflate no co-payments for anything, and no, it's only for the testing, it's not for the treatment. But I want to sit down with these politicians and ask them, do you think that just because coronavirus is a big threat that people aren't getting sick from other things? I don't think people's cancer suddenly went into remission just because we have this pandemic. People who are suffering from chronic problems involving respiratory issues, their heart, all sorts of things like diabetes, all sorts of conditions like that. Those are still an issue. Those can still leave you broke and on the street, especially in a time when every week millions of Americans are losing their jobs. Maybe Sunny Hostin, maybe she was saying a question that she herself does not believe. If so, I would make that clear when I ask questions that other people are saying and that I don't believe. I always make that very clear. But the way that she described that we should put politics aside and just get behind the president, that's how somebody who's literally never thought about politics before would talk. Do you believe that Donald Trump is doing that? Is he putting politics aside? Is Mitch McConnell putting politics aside? And what if we had done that? What if we had done what Sunny Hostin is implying some people want a month ago? And we'd never put any pressure on Donald Trump. Where do we think he would be today? Would testing kits be sent all around the country? Would some states have begrudgingly finally gotten some ventilators from him? Would he have just gone ahead with his plan to reopen the economy on Easter? The idea that what he's making are just leadership decisions. Everyone else is doing politics. That's how babies think about politics. That's not how serious people who get paid large amounts of money to analyze politics and news should be thinking about or talking about it. Whether they themselves believe these things or not, they should be clear to their audience what's actually going on.
Well, Sunny Hostin is very much aware of what's happening in politics. She does pay attention. I actually think Sunny Hostin is a pretty intelligent person. I agree with her on some things. I completely disagree with her complete and utter disdain for Bernie Sanders and the policies that would really improve the lives of so many Americans who are struggling, not just now, but who had been struggling under a broken system. We have not been prepared at all to deal with this pandemic. And a huge reason why is because of this for-profit commoditized model of healthcare that continues to treat people who can't afford private health insurance as second-class citizens who are worthy of death. And to point to a politician who wants to change that and argue that he's just, using this to his advantage to further his agenda, first of all, he should. Okay, because his agenda matters. What he wants to do matters. And secondly, if you can't discuss solutions for a broken system now, when can you? And Bernie Sanders sure as hell should not let them intimidate him from stopping this incredibly important messaging about healthcare, because that's what they want. Okay, they want to beat him to submission. He is insanely friendly to bad faith actors, and that drives me crazy personally. But no, if we can't make the case for Medicare for all now, then there's never a time when we can make a case for Medicare for all. And I want to go to the second video featuring Sunny Hostin, because I would argue that the framing of her question here is actually much worse.
Senator Sanders, this is Sunny. You say that the coronavirus crisis proves that our for-profit healthcare system is a failure. Can you explain why your Medicare for all plan would work better in this kind of scenario?
Well, right now, there is, for two reasons. Number one, there is growing anxiety in this country that people are increasingly unable to afford health care, or that they may not have any health care at all. Right now, before the epidemic, we were looking at 87 million people who are uninsured or underinsured. And now, when millions of people are losing their jobs, they're losing their health care. What do? We have the absurd situation that the recent stimulus bill covered you for the cost of the testing that you may need for the coronavirus. It did not cover the treatment. So you've lost your job, you may not have any income, and now you're worried about health care. What Medicare for all does is not a radical idea. It does what every other major country on earth does. It guarantees health care to all of our people not tied to employment. You lose your job, you got coverage.
Again, I think he handled that right. And the reason why I disagree with her framing there is because she uses the same tactic or trick that we see in journalism all the time, which is some people say, right? And I just think that I think Sunny Hostin is better than this, right? Because think about it. She knows how many people have lost their jobs. She knows how desperately people need those stimulus checks, which is nothing. It's a tiny Band-Aid on a gushing wound. And she still thinks that it's a valid question to ask, hey, why do you think that your single payer system would be better than this for-profit model?
Yeah.
Really?
Exactly.
You're smarter than that.
Well, yeah, and so have you read the Write-Ups by Doctors analysis of how, in general, countries that have systems like this are weathering this better? Have you, I can make the case, certainly, Bernie Sanders, I can make the case, but if you're that interested in it, you could read about it, and then maybe you could bring that up or bring some of those academics or doctors onto the show to make the case as well. If you want to put politics aside, which is a great thing to do in the middle of a primary election, I think. Maybe we put it aside for like 6 months. We just rally behind the president until he gets his second term. Obviously absurd. If I was Bernie Sanders too, I would, again, I don't know exactly what Sunny Hostin or any of the other hosts on The View think about what should be done in terms of coronavirus, but I would say look, a lot of Americans think that it's incredibly immoral that just because someone gets infected with coronavirus, that if they can't afford to get tested, they shouldn't be tested, or that if they indeed have it, that just because they can't afford to be treated, they shouldn't be treated. Should we let people die on the streets of coronavirus? And I assume that they would say, no, that's incredibly immoral. And I would say, okay, well, then why should we let that happen with the regular flu or with diabetes or with thyroid cancer? Why would we let this happen with literally anything? We are being like people who have not thought about this, about radically remaking the way healthcare is provided in America. They're being wakened up to how obviously immoral it is to let people die through no fault of their own. Now let's just widen things just a little bit and realize that it is just as evil to let people die because of lack of resources from literally any other health problem.
Yeah, and some people might argue, hey, it's The View, don't get too frustrated with it. It's just a daytime show. But all of this propaganda, unfortunately, does have some influence. And it seeps into social media. It seeps into conversations that average Americans are having. I'll give you an example because you mentioned morality, John. And I believe that it's immoral to allow people to die if they don't have the means to pay for private insurance. Today, Alyssa Milano tweeted, "It is intellectually bankrupt for Bernie to pretend that not unifying the party today is advantageous to a Democratic victory in November. He's still taking donations from people during crisis on a campaign that has no path forward." Mind you, I mean, we haven't finished the primaries yet. So to say that there's no path forward, is it going to be difficult? Yes. But, was there any pressure for Warren to drop out early, right? She dropped out when she was comfortable doing it. And anyone who tried to pressure her to drop out was completely criticized, lambasted. And with Bernie, it's okay, you need to drop out. And then she says it's intellectually and morally bankrupt. I think it's intellectually and morally bankrupt to support a candidate who has credible sexual assault allegations against him, sexual assault allegations which the media refuses to acknowledge, even though they jump on any and all sexual assault allegations when it has to do with individuals they dislike, okay? I think that it's morally bankrupt to be supportive of a candidate who was just asked on MSNBC whether he thinks a single-payer healthcare system would have been better for this country in the middle of this pandemic. And he said, no, I don't think it would have fixed anything. And, that's what he had to say, considering all those people who had an employer provided health insurance plan are now left to either pay for COBRA, which no one can pay for, or just not have any health insurance at a time when we don't have anything protecting us from the cost of treatment for COVID-19.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.